Valerie Bertinelli thought she had found a home at the Food Network. For nearly a decade, she became one of the network's most familiar and trusted faces. Viewers welcomed her into their kitchens every week, watching her cook family recipes, share personal stories, and bring a warmth that felt completely genuine. She believed loyalty still mattered in television. Then one day, it was over. No meeting. No phone call. Just a text message that quietly ended a chapter she had spent years building. For Valerie, the disappointment went far beyond losing a television job. She had invested a huge part of herself into the network during some of the most difficult years of her personal life. What she didn't realize was that while she was focused on creating authentic television, the company behind the scenes was changing fast. Executives were leaving. New leadership was arriving. And suddenly, everything she represented no longer fit the vision of the future. But how did one of Food Network's biggest stars become one of its biggest casualties? Long before she ever stepped into a television kitchen, Valerie Bertinelli had already built a remarkable career. Born on April 23, 1960, in Wilmington, Delaware, she spent much of her childhood moving from city to city as her father worked for General Motors. By the time she reached Los Angeles, she had learned how to adapt quickly and connect with people wherever she went. At just 15 years old, she landed the role that changed her life forever. Playing Barbara Cooper on the hit sitcom One Day at a Time, she quickly became one of television's most recognizable young stars. The role earned her 2 Golden Globe Awards and introduced audiences to the warmth and relatability that would define her career for decades. Adult roles followed, including appearances in Touched by an Angel and later the successful comedy Hot in Cleveland. By the time she received her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2012, she had already accomplished more than most actors dream of. But her next chapter was still waiting, and it would take her somewhere few people expected. In 2015, Bertinelli joined the Food Network with a simple idea. Instead of flashy gimmicks or dramatic competitions, she would invite viewers into her kitchen and share the food that mattered to her family. The result was Valerie's home cooking. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't loud. It was personal. And audiences loved it. Season after season, viewers returned because the show felt real. Valerie wasn't performing a character. She was being herself. That authenticity turned a simple cooking show into a 14-season success. The same year, she also joined Kids Baking Championship alongside Duff Goldman. Her natural warmth made her the perfect co-host, especially when working with young contestants who needed encouragement as much as competition. The success kept growing. She won 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Culinary Host. More shows followed. In 2018, Food Network signed her to an exclusive multi-series deal. At the time, it seemed like a clear sign that Valerie Bertinelli had become one of the network's cornerstones. But sometimes the strongest positions become vulnerable the moment leadership changes. And that is exactly what happened next. In April 2022, Discovery completed its merger with Warner Media, creating Warner Bros. Discovery. On paper, it was a business move designed to strengthen the company in a rapidly changing media landscape. Behind the scenes, it meant something else entirely. Cost-cutting, restructuring, contract reviews, and difficult decisions about who would stay and who would go. Many of the executives who had built relationships with talent like Bertinelli left during the transition. The people who understood what she brought to the network were suddenly gone. At almost the same moment, her exclusive deal was reaching its expiration point. The timing could not have been worse. Under the new leadership, Food Network was moving in a different direction. Traditional cooking shows were no longer the priority. Competition series, elimination formats, and high-drama programming were becoming the focus. It was cheaper to produce and often generated stronger short-term ratings. But what did that shift mean for someone whose entire appeal was warmth, education, and connection? To understand the answer, you have to understand how much the network itself had changed. When Food Network first became popular, viewers tuned in to learn. Shows like 30-Minute Meals, Good Eats, and Barefoot Contessa built loyal audiences by teaching real cooking skills. The hosts became trusted guides. People watched because they wanted to improve their cooking and spend time with personalities they genuinely liked. Over time, that model began to fade. Competition shows gradually took over the schedule. Programs built around timers, eliminations, and dramatic reveals became the new standard. Many longtime viewers noticed the change. So did many of the network's own stars. In 2024, Bertinelli publicly agreed with critics who felt the network's golden era of educational cooking content had ended. The shift wasn't subtle anymore. For fans who had spent years watching Valerie's home cooking, her cancellation felt like proof that something important had been lost. But while all of this was happening professionally, Valerie was dealing with enormous personal struggles that few viewers fully understood. The years leading up to her departure were some of the hardest of her life. In October 2020, her first husband, legendary musician Eddie Van Halen, passed away after a long battle with cancer. Although they had divorced years earlier, they had maintained a close friendship. His death brought a wave of grief that was both painful and complicated. At the same time, her second marriage was falling apart. Valerie and financial planner Tom Vitale separated in 2021, and the divorce process stretched through 2022. Later, she described the marriage as toxic. When the divorce was finalized in November 2022, she publicly called it the second best day of her life. That statement revealed just how difficult those years had been. Yet through all of it, she kept showing up to work. She continued filming. She continued smiling. She continued encouraging young bakers on television while carrying heartbreak behind the scenes. Most viewers never knew. And then came the message that made everything even harder. In January 2024, Bertinelli finally revealed how she learned she would not be returning to Kids Baking Championship. There was no personal conversation from network executives. No formal meeting. The news reached her through a third party in a text message. For someone who had spent nearly 10 years helping build the network's brand, the method felt deeply impersonal. It wasn't just the decision that hurt. It was how the decision was delivered. Soon after, Valerie addressed the situation publicly on Instagram. She acknowledged that the move was likely tied to budget cuts and corporate changes. At the same time, she admitted that her feelings were hurt. And many people understood exactly why. Support poured in from fans and fellow celebrities. Social media filled with messages of encouragement. The reaction revealed something that executives may not have fully appreciated. Viewers weren't simply attached to a television show. They were attached to Valerie herself. And that may be the most important part of this entire story. Educational cooking shows build a different kind of audience than competition programs. Viewers don't just watch. They form habits. They remember recipes. They develop trust. Over 14 seasons of Valerie's home cooking and 12 seasons of Kids Baking Championship, Bertinelli built exactly that kind of relationship. When she left, viewers felt they were losing someone familiar. Someone who had become part of their routine. That kind of loyalty is difficult to measure on a spreadsheet. It doesn't always show up in quarterly reports. But it matters. The company made a business decision. The audience made an emotional one. And those two decisions pointed in very different directions. What happened next showed just how portable that loyalty really was. Only a few months after her departure became public, Valerie announced positive changes in her life. She revealed she was in a new relationship and spoke openly about finding happiness again after years of pain. She also announced a new cookbook called Indulge, continuing the same style of personal, approachable cooking that had connected her with viewers for years. At the same time, new opportunities were emerging. The media world had changed dramatically. Streaming platforms, social media, YouTube, and direct-to-audience content offered possibilities that simply didn't exist a decade earlier. Valerie no longer needed a traditional television network to reach people. And that may be the lesson hidden inside this entire story. The audience that spent 14 seasons watching Valerie's home cooking was never loyal to a corporate logo. They were loyal to the person standing in the kitchen. The trust, the warmth, and the connection belonged to Valerie Bertinelli. not the institution that happened to broadcast her show. Today, her story stands as more than a contract dispute. It reflects a larger shift happening across entertainment. Companies facing financial pressure often prioritize short-term savings over long-term relationships. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it comes at a cost that isn't immediately visible. For Valerie Bertinelli, the cost was a decade-long chapter ending with a text message. For many viewers, it felt like losing one of the last reminders of a different era of food television. But while the network moved on, her audience largely stayed with her. That may be the part no spreadsheet could measure. Because in the end, television networks own programs. They own schedules. They own contracts. But they do not own the connection that forms when audiences trust someone year after year. Valerie Bertinelli spent nearly a decade building that connection. A text message ended her role at Food Network. It didn't end the relationship she had built with millions of viewers. And judging by everything that happened afterward, that relationship may have been the most valuable thing she took with her.